Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here this evening. We'll just take another minute or two for folks to join the training, and then we'll get started.
Hey Kyle, you can't see me. There we go.
Hi, Kevin. We're just giving folks another minute or two to enter the meeting, and then
Okay,
we'll get the
I
ball
had an
rolling.
issue with my sound like I had the other day. It's my computer, but not my headset.
Yeah.
So do I sound different?
It is a little quiet.
Okay, good.
Um,
I can kick that up.
yeah, if you could turn your volume up. Well, I think we can probably kick things off. Um, Hello, everyone. My name is Katz. I'm a regional planner with the Two Rivers Occoquechee Regional Commission. Uh, with me this evening is Kevin Geiger, Chief Planner. And before we dive in, I just want to make sure that everyone can see the screen. Um, so please just give me an indication that you can see the screen and that you can hear me. Awesome. Thank you. So this training is on the regional housing targets. We'll review how the state is looking to address the housing crisis through local and regional planning. Both the Act 47, the Home Act from 2023, and Act 181 from 2024 incorporated language into Title 24. That's the land use planning law on the need to address housing targets in local and regional planning. So this training will look at how housing targets have been incorporated into these, or how they will be incorporated as well into these planning processes, and what this means for municipalities, and how we can work to reach the housing targets. So we'll just dive right in from here. I don't know if you have anything to add, Kevin, or we can forge ahead.
Keep going.
Okay. All right, so just run through the agenda quickly. I'll start off with some background statistics, simply to lay the groundwork for how we arrived at the current housing shortage. And then I'll discuss the ongoing housing-related challenges that impact housing availability today. Uh, then we'll look at our housing challenges and how those impact our communities in various ways. We'll then dive into the changes from Act 47 and Act 181, um, and how the housing targets intersect with regional and local planning and what we need to do to incorporate those into our planning processes. Finally, I'll wrap up with some strategies that towns can pursue to work to meet the housing targets as specified in the regional plan. Feel free to ask questions as I go. Sometimes it's easier as we're going through a slide. If there's just something that calls your attention, feel free to raise your hand, and we can address it as we go along, or you can save your questions to the end. I'm happy to address them at any time. Great. So let's dive into some factors contributing to the current housing shortage. What you can see on the screen is the percent change in housing units over time in the state of Vermont from 1970 to 2024. And you can see that there was a pretty big increase in housing units between 1970 through 1990, and then it tapered off significantly 1990 through 2024. I think most significantly is that between 2010 and 2020, there was only 0.4% housing growth. And, this is across the state of Vermont. The housing trends at the regional level largely reflect those at the state level, as housing targets have been created for the entire state. State level numbers, mainly from housingdata.org, are used in this training just to show overall trends and kind of where we're at as a state. But this 0.4%, I'll call it a slowdown in new housing units, is largely a result of the housing crisis and Great Recession in the early 2000s. And essentially what this means, this lackluster housing growth, is that there are fewer homes available and less diversity of housing stock. And this can translate into higher prices for homes, particularly at the time when younger generations are looking to purchase a starter home. We also have discrepancies between the cost of homes and incomes over time. So this graphic shows the median home sale price per year compared with the Vermont area median income and the percent change for each over time. So while the median home sale price has increased 85% since 2009, the median household income has not kept pace, and it's only gone up by 52% since 2009. Now, this has a direct impact on affordability of housing. Many residents couldn't afford the homes that they live in today. And many residents, especially younger residents, cannot find homes for sale that they can afford. Or they're competing with many others in the housing market for the small number of homes in their price range. So if housing is out of reach, we won't get the residents that we need, and jobs will go unfilled, which has a direct impact on the local and regional economy. So another issue is that our housing stock does not align with the size of our households today. Household size is declining across the state, with most households having between 1 to 2 people. But a majority of our households live in units with 3 or more bedrooms. As you can see from the percentages on the left-hand side, only 30% of Vermont households have 3 or more members, and yet 58% of Vermont households live in housing with 3 or more bedrooms. Meanwhile, 70% of Vermont households have only 1 to 2 members, yet there are not enough smaller units available to accommodate this majority of smaller households. So what does this mean? Many of our smaller households are living in larger housing units than they need. This means much of our existing housing stock may be underutilized due to our current household composition. Residents are paying for more house than they want or need. We have smaller households. They're responsible for maintaining larger homes. This means mortgage costs, taxes, utilities, they're all shared among fewer people, and repair and maintenance costs are higher. Fewer residents can downsize or find smaller accommodations with less maintenance or upkeep costs. Many residents looking to age in place or who would prefer a smaller, more affordable home cannot find those available in their town or community. So the result is a mismatch between the homes that are available and the households that live in those homes. So there's no single event or issue responsible for the housing shortage, but there are many issues that play contributing roles. For instance, in 2021 to 2022, Vermont saw an influx of new residents as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. This bump in new households and in population has pushed the demand for housing even higher. At the same time, total active listings of short-term rentals, that's that middle chart on the screen, has continued to steadily increase, going from approximately 7,000 in 2018 to nearly 12,000 in 2025. And finally, across Vermont, 17% of housing units are considered vacation homes. This is a significant percentage of the overall housing stock that's not contributing to the year-round supply of long-term housing. So all of these factors have an impact on available housing. With limited new housing being built, an influx of new residents means more people are competing for fewer homes, and while a high percentage of vacation homes and an increase in short-term rentals translates over time to fewer long-term housing units available for current and would-be residents. So now we'll move on to some of the present challenges, one of which is a long-term demographic shift that's putting a strain on the availability of housing to meet our community needs. We currently have an aging population, while we're also seeing a decline in young people and working age adults. And we can see on the chart on the screen that darker green at the top, that is the 65 and over cohort of the population. We can see that between 1990 and 2020 and 2050, it's making up a much larger percentage of our overall population. Meanwhile, we're seeing a decline in that population between 20 and 64 and under 20. And so older residents often live alone and they may wish to age in place. But as we saw earlier, there are often very few smaller homes available. That's pushing many 1- and 2-person households to live in these larger homes. Meanwhile, as our working age population is shrinking, we'll continue to see impacts on the economy and jobs simply going unfilled, maybe fewer families moving to the region and the state, and then without affordable housing options and suitable wages, potential residents will simply move elsewhere. Finally, fewer younger residents means that we have fewer students enrolled in schools, and this puts a strain on our educational resources. So an additional present challenge is affording the cost of a home. We've seen a few of these numbers already on a previous slide, but they're worth highlighting in more detail. The median home sale price in Vermont in 2023 was roughly $352,000, which, based on housingdata.org's affordability calculator, you need a median income of approximately $117,000 to be able to afford. Vermont's household median income falls well short of that, leaving a deficit of nearly $40,000. So this puts in perspective that purchasing a home is largely out of reach for most households. So aside from being able to afford a home, many residents today experience the high cost of housing firsthand, or struggle to find housing altogether. So the number on the left at 31% is all the households in Vermont that experience either cost burden or severe cost burden. Cost burden occurs when residents spend more than 30% of their income on housing. This turns into severe cost burden when households spend over 50% of their income on housing. So nearly a third of all Vermont households are experiencing some form of cost burden. There's also been a significant increase in individuals experiencing homelessness. We can see that in the chart in the middle there, which spiked in 2020 to 2021, so during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's steadily increased ever since. With approximately 3,000 homeless across the state, this translates into thousands of needed units just to meet this need alone. And finally, we have a 2.9% 2023 rental vacancy rate across Vermont. A very low vacancy rate indicates that rental housing is also in short supply. Typically, a healthy rate is between 4 and 6%. And so a lower rate than that can lead to increased rental costs and very limited options for those searching for housing. So all of these challenges presented are by no means comprehensive, but they should be viewed as indicators for some of the barriers residents currently face to attain or retain housing in their communities. Okay, so now that we've looked at some of the housing challenges, we'll look at some of the ways in which our communities are impacted. So one of these is the economy and employment. The difficulty in finding housing means it is more challenging for new families and young people to relocate to the region in the state. This translates into reduced economic productivity, with fewer dollars going back into the local economy. Another area is in our school systems. Fewer students are enrolled in local schools. This has a direct impact on cost per pupil, and it puts a strain on our school systems. And we also have fewer housing options in general. There's less diversity of housing, diversity in size of our homes, in the makeup and composition. So this means that residents may not be able to find the housing they want or need in their communities. Those smaller housing units just aren't there, the ones that we need for those smaller households and folks looking to downsize or age in place. And finally, with fewer housing units, we have higher costs associated with renting or owning. Residents are spending more on housing, and this means they have less to spend on other things, other services, be it or amenities, be it grocery stores, restaurants, other places in their community that are part of the economy. And so all this helps to or impacts the economy as well. Okay, so this leads to Act 181 and Act 47. I mentioned these right at the start. And just to reiterate, Act 47 was the Home Act from 2023. It did a lot around zoning reform, but it also introduced some language around housing targets. And then Act 181 introduced that further. So on this slide, we'll look at how the housing targets intersect with local and regional planning. Some of the key areas are highlighted in statute. We have the state planning goals on the top. We have the regional plan and municipal plan. So the housing targets really intersect at different levels of planning. So first, the regional plan must adhere to the state planning goals, and the town plan must do so as well if it seeks regional approval. One of these state planning goals, which is at the top, is that quote, intensive residential development should be encouraged primarily in downtown centers, village centers, planned growth areas, and village areas as described in section 4348A of this title, and strip development along highways should be avoided. These areas should be planned so as to accommodate a substantial majority of the housing needed to reach the housing targets developed for each region pursuant to subdivision 4348A, A9 of this title. So the regional plan needs to allow for a substantial majority of housing to be located in the core settlement areas. Those are our downtown centers, our village centers, the planned growth areas, village areas, where we have most of our development, most of our services, um, and growth. And town plans must encourage housing in these areas as well if they're seeking regional approval. This has been a state planning goal for a long time. So it's a goal that town plans and regional plans have had to follow. But what's new is that need to accommodate a substantial majority of the housing target within these core settlement areas. So this requires towns to consider housing targets in the town plan when planning for growth in villages and denser settlements. The regional plan is specifically tasked in statute with identifying the regional and community level need for housing based on the regional housing targets, which are published by the Department of Housing and Community Development. And these housing targets get disaggregated to the town level within the regional plan housing chapter. In the municipal plan, if a town seeks regional approval, it must include, quote, a housing element that shall include a recommended program for public and private actions to address housing needs and targets as identified by the Regional Planning Commission pursuant to subdivision 4348A-A9 of this title. So the town plan needs to reference the housing targets identified by the Regional Planning Commission and must include a program of actions to address these targets and housing needs. So from state planning goals to the regional plan and the town plan, housing targets need to be accounted for. The regional plan must identify the community level need based on the housing targets provided by the state. And the municipal plan must identify specific actions that can help communities reach their housing goals. Okay, so what are the housing targets? We have two targets, more of a short-term target, which is that it's a 2030 target, so it's essentially from now to 2030, and then a long-term target, and that is up through 2050. For each target, we have a high and a low, representing the band within which our expected future housing need is located. These numbers, we believe, are actually below what is actually needed, since they don't touch on making housing affordable for the 30% of cost burden households that spend more than they can afford on housing. So for the regional plan, we use the high target. With the regional housing target, the RPC, so Two Rivers, is tasked with breaking these down by town. And we'll show a breakdown of town targets in a few slides. It's important to emphasize that the housing target is a goal, and it's a goal to meet a need. Now we've endeavored to show that need through the various statistics on, households and the cost of housing. So the need is very real. The goal is an aspiration, which we hope to meet that very real need. However, because it's a goal, it means that meeting that need is not, or not meeting the need is an option. We may not get there, and we probably won't get there by 2030. If we don't meet this need, it will have very real world impacts on many of the factors that I've brought up earlier in the presentation around employment, the economy, affordability, schools, the list goes on. Um, I'll just note that the 2030 and 2050 numbers use different methods to arrive at the estimates. I won't go into too much detail on the estimates, but since the 2030 estimate is not far off, this number is largely based on change in total households over time, with the expectation that household trends will continue in the short term. It also accounts for equalizing vacancy rates, ending homelessness, and replacing units that go offline or are converted from seasonal homes. The long-term 2050 target uses a cohort component model, and that looks at net migration, birth and mortality rates, along with the other factors um, accounted for in the 2030 target. So what do the housing targets mean for the regional plan? In the regional plan, the village and core settlement areas, those core settlement areas include village centers, downtown centers, village areas, and I'll show a slide with those areas mapped on it. Those core settlement areas will be expanded to accommodate the new housing needed. And there will be a breakdown of housing targets by municipality with the high target provided for each town. The housing chapter of the regional plan will estimate the housing needed in terms of price, quality, unit size or type, and zoning district. For the municipal plan, the housing targets are addressed slightly differently. But the future land use areas in the town plan, future land use map, as well as the policies in the housing chapter and land use chapter should be reviewed and revised to address and account for the new housing targets. And the town plan should reference the regional housing targets in the town plan housing chapter or land use chapter. Okay, so the graphic on the screen depicts a regional housing target, and it's disaggregated by town as well as by percent located within core settlement areas. That really dark red on the far right-hand side are towns with 65% of the housing target in core settlement areas. That's only for Randolph and Hartford. These towns have both water and wastewater systems, and they also have planned growth areas in downtown centers. And so the expectation is that 65% of the housing target for those towns can be located in the core settlements. The towns with 60% of the housing target located in the core settlements are those with either water or wastewater systems, as it's expected that these towns can accommodate slightly higher density given the public systems. And so there's 60% for those, and then towns with 55% of the target located in core settlements are those that lack public water and or wastewater. So the big difference with the Randolph and Hartford is that they have the downtown centers and planned growth areas. I'll also mention that the target is proportional based on population. However, we do use a modifier to account for variations based on whether towns have water or wastewater systems and access to the interstate. If a town has both, its target increased by 15%, because it's expected that the town can support more density in those core settlement areas, and that it has ready access to the interstate, and thus has a potential commuter base. And then if a town has neither interstate access nor local water or wastewater systems, its target decreased by 30%. But for towns with one or the other, it remained the same. There was no increase or decrease in that target. Okay, so on this slide, we see some examples of the new regional future land use areas to support housing. I've taken an example from Randolph, Fairleigh, and Brookfield. I think that they give a good diverse representation of what we'll be seeing in the regional plan. Um, so the first area that we'll look at is that downtown center, and Randolph, the example on the left-hand side has that downtown center, that deep dark purple in the center. And that is the densest mixed-use core settlement area in the region. Downtown centers typically have the most commercial activity, civic assets, more multifamily housing. And downtown centers have infrastructure and zoning and subdivision regulations. So these are all requirements for that future land use area. As we move outside of that downtown center in Randolph, we're still looking at Randolph, we have what's called the planned growth area. And that, as the name implies, is where we expect additional growth to occur. Planned growth areas are adjacent to downtown centers, and they're the expected future growth areas. They have a high concentration of population, housing, and employment. There is a requirement that planned growth areas be walkable to the downtown or village center, and that be planned for future growth. It's also supported by land development regulations, so zoning and subdivision, and public water and wastewater. Beyond and we're still looking at Randolph, beyond the planned growth area, we have these little, very light pink areas on the fringe, and those are village areas. These are located adjacent to village centers or downtown centers or planned growth areas. Village areas are more residential in nature, but they can also include a mix of uses, commercial and other development. Village areas are supported by adopted regulations, and they have water or wastewater or suitable soils for wastewater disposal. The other core area is the village center. And each town will have at least one village center in the region, in the regional future land use map. So we've got two on the screen here. We've got Fairleigh and Brookfield, both have village centers. In the case of Fairleigh, the village center has an adjacent small village area. And village centers are essentially, they're similar to downtown centers, but there is not a requirement that they have infrastructure or zoning or subdivision regulations. So it's not required to have all those components that you need for a downtown center. And then we can see the Brookfield, we just have the village center area, and there's no village area or any of the other core settlements. So policy language in the regional plan supports housing development in these areas at higher densities. Some towns can also apply for additional Act 250 exemptions within these areas that would support additional development and housing. This is known as Tier 1A or Tier 1B, and we'll give a little more detail on that in an upcoming slide. Okay, so how did the housing targets translate into new homes? They don't, at least not directly. Housing targets are a goal. They tell us how many homes are needed. They do not create new homes or define how to reach this goal. To get the new homes, we are heavily reliant on the housing market, and there's little public funding available to subsidize new housing. But there are some local mechanisms in place for towns to support new housing, one of which is expanded village areas, village centers, and town plan future land use maps. Expanded villages can allow for a higher density of housing in the traditional settlements. Also, strong policy language that supports new housing in and around our traditional centers. Policy language in the town plan that supports higher density housing in village centers can help new housing developments take place. And towns with zoning regulations can ensure that the regulations are compliant or exceed the state requirements, such as allowing for more units per acre in our denser core settlements, our village centers, and adjacent neighborhoods. And towns can put together housing committees or collaborate with developers and nonprofits to explore new housing opportunities. Finally, some towns may already have higher density housing in village centers, but future growth is limited by a lack of infrastructure. So towns can support the development of new systems, water and wastewater systems that can support future housing and higher density of housing and other uses in the core settlements. Okay, so just a little on the Act 250 exemptions, the Tier 1A and Tier 1B. These are two areas located in our core settlements. One is a little easier to apply for than the other. I'll start with the more difficult one, Tier 1A. Um, Tier 1A allows for essentially all Act 250 exemptions within the Tier 1A area. The town takes over Act 250 permitting in this area for everything. Um, and or for yeah, and including all housing related projects. It's an opt-in, which means a town has to decide they want to do it. They do a resolution, they apply. It is only really for the largest towns with infrastructure, local capacity. You have both subdivision and zoning. So these are all requirements for towns that want Tier 1A. And if a town opts in, the Tier 1A will be mapped consistent with the downtown, village center, and planned growth areas in the regional plan. Tier 1B is a little more flexible in that it also requires a community to opt in, but communities are eligible if they have water, wastewater, or suitable soils. There's not this, you need the infrastructure to be able to opt into this. You can show that you have suitable soils and that is sufficient, but zoning and subdivision regulations are still required. And for towns that opt in and are approved for Tier 1B, the area is mapped by the Regional Planning Commission. So for our region, it's Two Rivers Occoquechee Regional Commission as part of the regional future land use process. Finally, and this may be this is a question I know has come up in at other points, but how do we track? We have these housing targets, but how do we track the progress toward meeting the 2030 targets across the state? Well, the state of Vermont has created a dashboard, the Vermont Center for Geographic Information, developed it to track statewide and regional housing targets. It incorporates data from a number of sources, including E911 and regional planning commissions that compile permitting and track new housing units that way. And it can view state level, region, and town level unit production. If I encourage everyone to check it out. There's a link embedded on this slide. If and when you do go and just look through the dashboard, it will say that it is a work in progress. They're still refining the methodology and improving the data that goes into it. So it uses the data that's available, but it's continuously being refined over time. So this is a way that we can track that progress toward meeting our housing goals. As you can see, the screenshot is from the state level target, which for 2030 is 41,000, meaning the annual need is 8,000, and the state is on pace to build 12,000. So that gives an indication of where we are at in terms of where we need to be and where it seems like we're going. So there's certainly a gap there. Okay, and that is everything. I'll open it up to questions and comments. Kevin, if there's anything I missed, feel free to chime in.
No, that sounds good. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, good. Yep. So I'll keep an eye on the Zoom.
Okay. I'm happy to shuttle back to earlier slides as well.
So DC, you have a question
Well, it's something of a
or comment?
question, something of a question, something of a observation. Basically, we're in a unique situation here in Thetford where we have 5 distinct villages. And unlike a place like Fairleigh, for example, we don't have a highly defined center of town. Um, 2 things we've been exploring of late. One is pocket neighborhoods or cottage courts. The other one is tiny homes. Uh, both of them clearly utilize a minimum of space relative to, you know, traditional housing approaches in the past. I know the state has made some progress relative to zoning requirements for single family residences, but we're really trying to key in on both the pocket neighborhood and tiny home uh, aspects of adding additional housing here. Um, Tiny homes in particular, I know these are a relatively new topic, but I'm a little perplexed. When I was talking to the zoning administrator today, she is too. The state, even though it sets out requirements for tiny homes in terms of RBES standards and building codes and so forth, and even has a definition of what a tiny home is, hasn't really formalized a category, if you will, of tiny homes as a legitimate option. And surprisingly, we're getting a number of inquiries, was surprising to me anyway, a number of inquiries from younger people who want to move to Thetford around tiny homes. Uh, but there seems to be a really amorphous set of regulations and requirements for them. So uh, in order to fulfill missing middle housing, which is a term I prefer to affordable or workforce housing because those terms tend to engender a negative reaction, a socioeconomic relationship or context that tends to trigger people. So I call it missing middle housing. Um, is there an emphasis going forward, at least on the regional level, if not the state level, towards more condensed housing like pocket neighborhoods or tiny homes?
I can jump in and Kyle may know some more. So I would
That was a
say
long observation,
that,
Kevin's way.
that's okay. Um, there, first off, a lot of the emphasis on new home construction is in those areas with sewer and water. And I think somewhat looks at past housing development, which are sizable structures, 30, 40 units at a slam. Um, and so I don't think that there has been as much attention at all placed upon uh, something that looks like the picture in front of you, or half the picture in front of you. A- and so that's something that we actually think would work in a lot of our communities in terms of scale, in terms of not having sewer and water. You could still put not maybe in this particular place because the central green is small, but you could put the septic in the central green area that the homes are around. I would say from kind of a regulatory side, right now, all a tiny home is just a home that is tiny. And so it's really no different than a standard house, except it's small. Um, and So you're saving by building less structure. In terms of kind of housing production, one of the things that smaller homes, this size, so can be done is you can panelize them or modularize them easier because they're, in chunks that'll be 12 feet wide and stuff. The state is looking at how to better, I would say, ramp up that kind of production model. And whether that's trying to locate actually production facilities in the state to do that, trying to help them as a business get off the ground. One of the things that they have talked about a little bit is also trying to guarantee some production basically buy. And so for the people who would say, okay, I want to build a Vermont compliant, code compliant with Vermont, with the residential building energy standards, that type of thing. It makes sense only if I'm going to build 200 houses, 300 houses, or something at that scale in pieces. Right. And so the state has talked about basically guaranteeing a buy on that, going, okay, we'll order those, but they're never going to buy them as the state. They just kind of act as this intermediary, put up some of the money so the factory can get going. And then basically, people just sign up and go, I want one and I want one. And it's kind of like co-op buying in some ways. And all the state does is uses a bit of its capital to engender that production. So that's one of the things that's out there. And another thing that's out there is I think we're going to be seeing later this year, even maybe, basically state made small home plans that are full architectural plans that are compliant in Vermont, and so that you can just go, there. I don't have to worry about hiring the architect and everything else. I have this thing out there.
That would be terrific. Apart from the space requirements that these smaller developments would allow, another point of emphasis has been that while rental properties have their place, certainly, we'd like, in Thetford at least, to encourage people to put down roots here and really become community members and not transients, as it were. Meaning that these homes, whether they be in a pocket neighborhood, cottage court, or a tiny home, be affordable to the point where an owner can build equity over time. And I'm speaking personally here, not for the Planning Commission or the Select Board or anybody else, but I would very much like to see that orientation going forward, a real emphasis on home ownership and an equity build as part of this plan.
Yeah, that's one of the things that has been kind of driving some of the work we are doing in-house is less so on the rental market and more so on home ownership for a variety of reasons. But somewhat along those equity lines, also probably a preference for some of that out there. And again, I think the traditional affordable housing pipeline, if you're using federal funds, that type of stuff, is largely geared towards rental, subsidized rental properties. And so the models for ownership of things they're out there, but they're just less. And I see I see a comment. Kyle, do you see the comment from Greg about has Randolph opted into Tier 1A? Nobody can become Tier 1A yet. That will be part of the regional plan process, but we will be sending every town basically a memo going, would you like to get picked to be Tier 1A or 1B? And here are the things you'll need to be in that game. We thought that could be, that we could kind of do that partway in the regional plan, and then towns could do the rest. So that, you know, it might say these are potential, and then towns could say later beyond the regional plan, they might be able to say, okay, now we want in. And the latest we have from the Land Use Review Board is that they actually want it in the regional plan for the towns that want to be in now. And so we will be sending select boards especially that request stuff. And we think that that there'll be a couple of memos on that just to warm people's minds up. Select boards are very busy this time of year, but that we'll be doing a lot of outreach, especially in January and February, probably February in terms of meetings, because that's a good time because everything's locked.
I did see, Jan, you mentioned, I hope, because it was at 6:30.
I just your slides dropped off the last few slides. I didn't see. I assumed when you were talking tier 1A and 1B, I assumed there was a slide, but it wasn't visible to me. But that wasn't my comment now. I'm curious on the topic of how do we make it more likely that housing can get built, and what are the barriers to getting it built. And I just saw a blog post from Jonah Richard in Fairleigh about the state regulations relative to putting septic under parking, and that Vermont was the only New England state that didn't allow that. And then in talking with other people, there were other Vermont regulations about fill from off-site, and is there a list and a sort of a concerted list of the barriers or the things in state regulatory and permitting environments that are just barriers that make it harder? And then is there a concerted effort to look at those one by one and say, wait, this isn't reasonable. This has been proven to work in other states. And go down that list and remove the barriers.
Somewhat, Jan, I would say. Um, we approach these things in a couple ways. I would say, first off, in our draft regional plan, we talk about like somebody should look at this particular thing, and septic standards is one of those. And so that, that doesn't do a lot. That it's somewhat a reminder to us to, hey, work on this. But we are actually working. We regional planning commissions writ large are working right now with some legislators around that issue to see if legislation can pass. It would probably be a study committee that would direct, A&R to say, hey, parking lots work for them. Why don't they work here? Some other things in terms of flow requirements are our flow numbers pretty high. It's different if you take one bedroom out of your house and you stick it in an ADU, that flow requirement for that ADU is different than the one bedroom that was in your house. Why? And some other things. So we think low flow fixtures don't get you anything. The numbers kind of assume everybody will rip those out and put in the high flow fixtures.
So who is leading that? Is that the regional commissions? Is that who is driving that activity?
I tell you, it's not the Agency of Natural Resources.
No, they wouldn't be. I mean, somebody's going to have to convince them, even though the state is saying you got to build thousands and thousands of houses, A&R isn't going to all by themselves remove requirements.
And so the Chittenden County and Addison County Regional Planning Commissions are the particular people working with legislators on that item. And we've sent them some engineer people we know and some other examples and that type of thing, just so that they could get expert testimony, because we don't, we have, kind of.
Yeah, I would just, I'd be happy to know, where I could lend a voice to add to, even if it's just, hey, call so-and-so, we're going to do legislation on this, or because it seems like if there's a concerted, a good list of what the barriers are, then we could get a bandwagon to try and remove them.
Yeah, and one other thing I should mention, while I have it, and then we can run over to the thing. The VHIP program, which is a state subsidy to upgrade rental properties, One of the things we have heard there, and so one of the things we'll try to poke somebody to do, is that is a good program. It's really nice. It works, but you got to have money because it's a reimbursement program. And so is there a way that the state could, and so that essentially cuts out people of lower income from taking advantage of that. And even though the cash flow later would be perfectly fine. And so we're trying to say to the state, is there some way we basically get over that capital hump and not make this, you got to go borrow $50,000 or have $50,000 to get the 50,000.
I did see that that Greg had put a question in the chat. So why create cottage communities when a pattern for walkable village centers already exists? Then when I drive on 113 through Thetford Village Center, I see a town garage and poor use of land within the village center. I think like one thing, because I did work a bit with Thetford way back when on cottage court language or pocket neighborhood language. And one of the big barriers, aside from, the cost of materials and that sort of thing, is the fact that there's no separate provision for pocket neighborhoods. It kind of gets folded into planned unit developments and then goes through all of the review standards for conditional use and planned unit development that a planned unit development would go through. So if that's the case, why do a cottage court when you can do a 30-unit subdivision on half-acre lots or 1-acre lots? And so I think that pocket neighborhood could just give an additional option, make that option available and make it easier for that to come about. It doesn't mean that it will happen, but it's providing a separate or a different path to build housing than what's available in most zoning bylaws. So
Yeah, I can speak just for Thetford here, but we're currently debating, Kevin spoke about this earlier, as did Kyle, about the tier 1B versus tier 3 status. And when I spoke with our development review board chair about applying for tier 1B status, one of his concerns was that the DRB, being a volunteer organization, tier 1B construction developmental considerations may be beyond their capabilities, if you will, or more of a responsibility than they wish to take on in terms of scale. In terms of a town like Thetford, there's a real sensitivity to large scale imposing development, if you will. I think it would be much more successful for us, having 5 separate villages, to have distributed development on a limited scale in terms of acreage, to preserve the landscape and the environment, which is no small thing. And I think it would go over much better in terms of public acceptance, as opposed to, say, a 50-unit development near the Pompanousek River, for example. But just my observation.
And maybe, Kyle, I could jump in a little bit too, back on Greg's question. That's one of the, question about, wait a minute, we got a town garage in the middle of town here. Maybe that should be housing. Those are great conversations for communities to have. We're not going to have those by our lonesome necessarily. Kyle has drawn the village areas as a big area to go, this is a good spot to do stuff, and it works inside here. However, we are working with 2 towns right now. We've worked with a couple other ones. If you want to go through that process, through a planning grant or some other ways, and actually play out some ideas and draw some pictures, do some things around that, talk to us, because there are potential grant funds for next year to do that type of visioning and actually see what works, and do the surveying and the drawing at a napkin engineering level to go, oh, you could actually put such and such units and you could put them this way or that way.
And you know, David, just get to your point on kind of weighing Tier 1B. It's my understanding that you know, there's already through I think the end of 2026 an exemption in place for Act 250 for up to 50 units in villages. So it's not as though that's not already there, and it's not as though 50 unit developments are just going in left and right. So you know, my thought is I don't expect that opting into Tier 1B will uh, be you know, it's not everything of like, oh, these 50 unit developments are going to come in and the DRB has to review it. It probably won't be like that because there's that exemption right now, and you're not necessarily seeing those go in and getting those reviewed through the DRB.
Oh, that's a great point. And we're just trying to be cautious here and weigh the relative merits of the two-tier options right now. Tier 1B certainly has some attractive components to it. There's no doubt about it.
Great. And it looks like Kevin's put in
I just put that link to the bubbles, we call them, these exemption areas. Even outside those exemption areas, by the way, if you have a commercial building with an Act 250 permit on it, no matter where that building is, you can do 28 units of housing in there and not be an Act 250. So Gene, I see your hand.
Thank you. Can you say that again, Kevin?
On the commercial building?
Yeah.
So the other thing they did besides the kind of bubbles is they said any commercial building that has an Act 250 permit on it right now is basically is convertible to up to 28 units of housing without going through Act 250 until the end of next year.
End of next year.
Yeah. And the deal on both of those is that you have to begin construction by the end of next year. Not just have permits in hand, but actually be building something.
Hey, I'm all new to this, I got to tell you. And it's a little overwhelming, and it really feels like pie in the sky kind of mandates or like goals, considering that we're supposed to be, you know, we're told that we should increase our new units by 4 to 5 times what we've had in the past. So I'm wondering, in the past like 5 years, for this next 5 years, I'm wondering how this is all supposed to shake out here. And like, how do we get all these new builders? How do we get all these new people incentivized to do either ADUs or developments? It just doesn't seem like we have enough resources, either from the state or regional commission level, to make this all happen. I don't know. The other thing I want to say is like, I ended up coming into this meeting because I had another meeting that canceled. But I did not know of it until like the Newberry Housing Committee, thank you, Tony, mentioned this in their presentation. So I feel like on the select board, I don't know why I didn't know about this. Maybe my Two Rivers Ottaquiche representative wasn't in the know. They didn't know either about this session. But if we could level up like the awareness between the select boards in the towns and the planning commissions, PR campaigns, whatever, I think that would really kind of stir more people to get involved. And then one specific question I had is, how do you analyze your water and sewer to make sure that this added capacity is manageable?
Yeah, so with water and sewer, we're not going in and looking at, okay, what is the capacity of the system? Because often the towns themselves don't know exactly how much capacity is left in the system.
Exactly.
We just assume we go in with the assumption that you have a system and it works.
Yeah.
And we're not going to go fiddling with little dials to get different measurements per town based on how we think the system is functioning or not. And then,
Thank you for the session, and I look forward to hearing more about this housing need.
great, thank you, Jean.
Thank you.
Let's see. Looks like from the Sharon Planning Administrator was the best area of research planning to focus on right now. This end of year, new year time. I want to be able to have backing and leads on resources for some basic essential concerns like developers and septic wastewater.
I think in the real short term, the best thing is just to try to be conversant with all the programs, the things, just so that if somebody came to you, you could go, okay, you got to do this, 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 talk to this person, do that. We have built some of that. I'll put a link in there on stuff, but we're constantly trying to do more because it is not at all a simple system. And we didn't make it, so.
No, but I mean, you know, instead of maybe going down a deep dark rabbit hole, you can also just reach out to us, the Regional Planning Commission, because we tend to know who it is that you might need to talk to. If we don't have that information, we probably know who does and can connect you with the right person. Excellent. Well, we've gone a little past 7. Happy to hang out a little longer if there are additional questions, but Kevin just put in the chat Keys to the Valley. Looks like it's the ADU guide. So please take a look at that. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions or concerns. And great. Well, thank you for attending the training.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Good job. Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah. Let's see. Well,